Happy Wednesday afternoon, everyone. Hope you're finding the week to be well. It is a weird week. I have been off on my days all week because I thought that Monday was Sunday and Tuesday was Monday. Today, I'm confident is Wednesday when this video is hitting the internet. That's Andrew Ellis. I'm Jeremy Birmingham. This is Talking Stuff, and we are talking about Ohio State football recruiting stuff. It seems like, Andrew, the Ohio State recruiting momentum that was obvious and copious at the end of April or the end of March into the first couple weeks of April has done what everyone expected it to do, which is subside a little bit because we are now 2 months away from Ohio State really being aggressive as far as hosting recruits, which is when dials get moved and so on and so forth. Of course, they did host some key players throughout the month of May, including David Sanders, who will be back at the end of June for his official visit. But even in that recruitment, it seems like people have decided to slow down their excitement because of visits to Nebraska, Georgia, Tennessee, Clemson this weekend for his official visit there. And I think it's a good time to remind people that the recruiting cycle for the class of 2025 does not really end until December, and there are going to be ebbs and flows. And as long as the players Ohio State is recruiting are not committing elsewhere, then a lot of the things we see on the internet, a lot of the stuff that we hear coming out of visits or from recruiting summits or whatever are designed for one purpose. And Andrew, can you tell me what that purpose might be?
To generate clicks.
To generate clicks. That is correct. However, it is natural and easy to get worked up about these things because you don't want to believe. And I think this is because college football has changed so much in the last 5 years, but I don't remember it feeling that gross 5 years ago as far as the constant over the top updates about every single thing. But we are in a much shorter news cycle, and everyone has the attention span of a flea. And so we continuously just bounce back and forth between today, this person is Ohio State's in the top 2. Next week, they're not in the top 4. The next week, they're in the top 1. Next week, they're out of the top 40. Like, it doesn't matter really until we get into decision modes being made. And I think maybe that's why. And Andrew, you can correct me if I'm wrong, because I know you're kind of feeling the crunch here a little bit. You're feeling the pinch. But as we are heading into June, which becomes sort of decision season for a lot of guys, you'd like to see more positive outward momentum to make you feel better heading into the official visits. Would that be accurate?
Yeah, I think that's accurate. It's not necessarily doom and gloom, but the last few weeks there haven't been a lot of positive developments. If anything, we saw Blake Woodby decommit, and I know we've been talking about that for 6 months leading up to that news. But yeah, not a lot of sunshine and rainbows of late, but really it doesn't matter until, these next several weeks during official visits. And then it really doesn't matter until December when these guys make their make their decisions final. But there is a lot of click mining going on lately. I think we saw some of that last cycle with Jeremiah Smith, and now it seems like it's out there for several guys, many of which are very much on Ohio State's radar. So not the most optimistic right now, but I think there's a lot of smoke screens and stuff going on out there. So I'm not in panic mode or anything like that yet.
Yeah, I think what it comes down to is that there is a belief, and it is a false one, that recruiting is a zero-sum game, and that if there are positive reports about a player and a different school, that it means things have gone bad with Ohio State. And that's just simply not the case. When Ohio State had David Sanders on campus 3 weeks ago, everyone in the national recruiting media was salivating, freaking out to, oh my gosh, Ohio State's the team to beat. Since then, and I'm only going to use David Sanders as an example to talk about this now because I think he's the most relevant case of it. But since then, he's been to Georgia, he's been to Nebraska, he's been to Tennessee. None of those visits have come and gone, and Ohio State has been talked about less. It's still like, he made this visit, but Ohio State is still very much in the mix. And that is pretty much the case with everyone that Ohio State's actively recruiting. The Buckeyes are the team to watch in a number of instances. And worse for Ohio State fans specifically is that I think Ohio State becomes the target for everyone else. Because if a player is interested in Ohio State, then the price tag goes up, the willingness to spend on them goes up, and the attention that these players draw in the click game goes up. And I think it's a catch-22 for Ohio State fans, because they are, without question, the most passionate fan base in the country. Sometimes that leads to being a little bit hyper-reactive. And in a world right now, in a recruiting world where people are clearly trying to pull the emotional heartstrings like day in and day out, it does not take much to look at Twitter and see what I'm talking about when it comes to every single player that Ohio State has committed or is recruiting. I mean, Naeem offered earlier this week, there was a quote or an Oregon podcast who said that he told them he was wide open in his recruitment. And I asked him, I said, did you say this? He said, I did not say that. So like, you don't know what's being really said, what's being just, assumed, what is being interpreted. And a lot of times, especially as we head into this time of the year, it's just a momentum game. And right now, Ohio State doesn't have the momentum because a lot of these players haven't been on campus. But there are a lot of players coming back this week to campus to begin the official visit season. It's going to be a 4-weekend stretch for Ohio State of probably close to 50 official visitors, maybe a little bit more than that over the next 4 weekends. And we're just going to dive into the first weekend, the May 31st to June 2nd weekend, right now on Talking Stuff. So, first official visit weekend begins on Friday. 2 Ohio State commits. The Buckeyes have 12 commitments right now, Andrew. 9 of them are on defense, so it is a weird cycle for a number of reasons at this point. The Buckeyes have the number 2 ranked class in the country. And I think probably the most important official visitor that's already in the mix for Ohio State, there's 2 visitors that are committed. That's Deshaun Stewart, the safety from New Jersey, and TJ Alford, our linebacker edge rusher from the Florida coast, to the Treasure Coast down there in Florida, Vero Beach. He did not visit Georgia 2 weekends ago, like there was all the discussion about, or last weekend. Was it last weekend? 2 weekends ago? 2 weekends ago.
2 weekends ago. I'm telling you, the way that time is going by right now is extremely hard for me to keep up. It's a world where TJ Alford needs to get back to Ohio State, not because TJ Alford has any doubts about Ohio State, but because the more that the Buckeyes can get him and his family around James Laurinaitis, around the coaching staff in Columbus, to make sure that everyone in the family remains on board with the decision, is vital. And I think it's a good chance for the Buckeyes to put some distance between them and Florida, Miami, Florida State, Georgia, everyone else who's going to be trying to sway TJ. And again, I think it's extremely important to reiterate, like, this is not a situation where TJ Alford himself is like having any doubts about Ohio State. I am confident in saying that he is 100% locked in with his decision, but it is hard for teenagers to not pay attention to if somebody in their family has a different opinion. Yeah.
No,
you're exactly right. I totally agree. I think it's more of a convince some of the closer family members than you are convincing the kid. I think James Laurinaitis has already done that. Me personally, I'm going to be concerned about Miami all the way up until the time until he signs in December. And I guess to a lesser degree, Florida and Florida State as well. But to me, it just seems like Miami is the prime contender here. Though I will say I'm glad he did not make that trip to Athens.
Yeah.
Of the committed guys, getting him back on campus this weekend, it's a big deal.
I think the reality is that there is nothing Ohio State can do to make everyone love Ohio State. And like, you can be as genuine as you possibly can be with a recruit. You can have the perfect plan for development. You can have NIL out the wazoo. You can have the chance to win national championships year in and year out. You can have all those things in place. But if you grow up in the South and you think that people in the North are crappy for whatever reason, then you are not going to want your kid to go there. And so I don't know that there's anything Ohio State can really do to combat that other than just be themselves. And for James Laurinaitis and the staff at Ohio State to continue to impress upon TJ Alford and everyone in his family that it's clearly what TJ wants to do and that they believe that they have the best plan for his future, and realize that if things go correctly, if things go the way they should for a player of his athletic talent, then it's a 3-year pit stop in Columbus, Ohio, before he heads off to the NFL and makes himself a butt ton of money. So it is a very interesting conversation right now. But again, I think it's important that people understand that this is not a scenario where Alfred himself seems to have any reluctance or hesitation or second thoughts about his choice.
Yeah, exactly. And it kind of does remind me of the Jeremiah Smith thing, just because we talked about how his dad and some of his dad's friends like grew up in that time period where Miami was the big thing down there, in the early 2000s and that kind of thing. And I don't know if that's what's drawing Alfred's family to Miami specifically, or if it's just a matter of being closer to town, closer to home, better weather, all that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, getting him to campus is huge. I'm sure he's going to take buku more visits between now and December, but Laurinaitis just has to keep reminding him of why he made the decision he made in the first place, I guess.
Yeah. And again, it's also worth reminding that when he committed to Ohio State, he told the Buckeyes he was going to take other official visits. That is not a surprise, but it still is important, I think, for Ohio State to get the first one to set the bar pretty high, because what Ohio State does as a program on these visits is really, really great for a number of reasons. And regardless of family draws elsewhere, the reality of the situation is that there are very few places in the country that can match up to what Ohio State does and what Ohio State has to offer. So I think just getting everyone into town and giving an opportunity to refresh that a little bit, I think, is pretty important. I don't want to completely dismiss Deshaun Stewart. Obviously, Ohio State safety commit from Wayne High School, DePaul, New Jersey. Buckeyes love him. I mean, he committed with little to no fanfare back in April or end of March, but he is one of the guys that they're counting on at safety. They seem to love the New Jersey safeties with Jordan, starting back with Jordan Fuller and Jaden Bonsu and now Jalen McClain. This is a guy that they really like, and we can talk more about safety and everyone else that they're recruiting at that spot over the next few weeks. But Deshaun Stewart is committed, and he's one of I believe it's 10 total official visitors this weekend. Let's move to the offensive visitors, because this is where the real fireworks are for Ohio State this weekend. We start with Bo Jackson, Ohio State getting the second official visit for Bo. Georgia hosted him 2 weekends ago on their big scavenger hunt weekend. He'll go to Alabama. I believe Alabama is the 7th. And that might be it for him before a decision gets made. So a pretty important weekend for the Buckeyes with Bo and his family to have him be on campus by himself, which is an important thing as far as the other running backs go. Yeah, they are clear with him that they're recruiting multiple running backs and they'd like to sign multiple running backs. But I still think it's important, Andrew, to have a player by himself as opposed to having him be a part of a group at that sort of position.
Yeah, and I'm glad they're being clear with him on that, because as we've said, they have to take at least 2, if not 3 in the class. So I'm glad that message has been relayed appropriately, I guess. But yeah, getting him on campus, he's the only running back visiting this week as far as the official visitors go. I felt a little bit uneasy there about Georgia for a bit, maybe Alabama too. Still feel a little bit that way, but not, again, not a sense of panic or anything. And getting him back is huge for Carlos Loughlin. So.
Yeah. Anthony Turbo Rogers will visit Ohio State this week. He's an Alabama commitment running back who played at the same high school as Quinshon Judkins when he was a freshman. Carlos Loughlin was the first coach to offer him years ago. Like, they have a very good relationship. He's making an unofficial visit on Thursday. I expect that he will make a return visit in the fall for an official visit, depending on how things shake out running back wise for Ohio State over this next few weeks. But yes, this weekend, it's all Bo Jackson getting all the love from Carlos Loughlin and Ryan Day, and that's important. Wide receivers, a little bit different. It's a class where Ohio State will have 3 official visitors this weekend, including DeCorian Moore, the number 1 ranked receiver in the country. Vernell Brown, a player that we have seen his recruitment shift quite a bit since his last trip to Columbus in April. A lot of people started penciling him in and crystal balling him and future casting and RPMing and all that stuff to Ohio State back at that time. And since then, his recruitment is one where people have started to talk a lot about other schools, Florida, Florida State, Miami, specifically Florida. But no crystal balls have changed, Andrew, and you know how I feel about that. This industry, and I say this industry with myself included, the people's egos are way too important. If they felt sure that he was picking Florida, they would be changing their crystal balls. No one has, and so to me, that makes me think that people are still believing that there's a smokescreen in play here, and Ohio State will still be the team to beat. I still think Ohio State's the team to beat for him. I still think Ohio State's the team to beat for Bo Jackson. I think Ohio State is the team to beat for Henry Fanuku, offensive lineman from Texas, who will visit this weekend. Second visit in 3 weeks for him. He was on campus as an unofficial visitor in the second weekend of May. Big, athletic guard type who also has the athleticism to maybe be a swing tackle. Very raw, but the Buckeyes love the upside there. And then Caden Strayhorn is a Michigan State legacy. He's originally from the Michigan area, plays at IMG. I think he's probably going to end up at Michigan, and I don't know that Ohio State has really pushed super hard for him yet. He has visited a couple times, and the relationship with Justin Fry is there. It's not like it's just on the periphery, but I think from a center standpoint, I think the preference for Ohio State would be Stargell from Georgia. Andrew Stargell and Caden Strayhorn would be a center all the way in college. So it's a good group. It's 6 guys on offense. And of the 6, I mean, you're looking at 3 players in Jackson, Moore, and Brown who have been circled as high priority guys for months. And then a player like Henry Fanuku, who is starting to creep into that conversation because Ohio State's expanded their offensive line search to 5 guys. Dalen McCutcheon has visited multiple times. He's at Lovejoy High School in Lucas, Texas. That's the same high school that produced Peyton Pierce in the class of 2024. So they do have some ties there. Really good player. He's a player similar in size and style to Phillip Bell in California, Talon Taylor in Illinois. I think one of those guys could end up in this class for Ohio State, and Dalen will have the first crack at it this weekend, but I don't know that he's really ready to get close to trigger pulling. Thoughts on the offensive group?
I mean, just real quick with Vernell Brown, you mentioned all the chatter about him staying in the state of Florida, but nobody changing their RPMs, crystal balls, future casts yet. The only reason I have some concern there is because a week or 2 ago, I was kind of thinking the same thing about another wide receiver that we're going to talk about later, Jamie French. And there's all that talk about Texas, Ohio State no longer being in the top 3 or whatever. And then all of a sudden you do see that wave of crystal balls and future casts to Texas come in. So I don't know. I feel like with some of the news that's come about of late, Vernell Brown is moving up the receiver board. For me personally, I know he's been at the very top for Brian Hartline for a long time, and that's all that matters. But I'm kind of fascinated to see how that one plays out. There seems to be some confidence on the Florida side right now. And then DeCorian Moore, if Bo Jackson's not the most important official visitor, well, I guess there's 3 names you could make a case for. But DeCorian Moore, I don't know if I love Ohio State getting that first visit or not. Maybe it won't matter, but we'll see.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to see what happens with DeCorian. I actually, and maybe this is just me being the eternal optimist that I am, I personally, I have had a hard time buying that Ohio State would be able to bring in Jamie French and DeCorian Moore in this same class for a while. I think it has been possible, but I don't think it was ever really likely. And I mean, I've been back and forth on the French thing on this show for a few months. I just don't see those 2 in the same place. And I know that there is a widespread belief that French and DeCorian Moore and Khalil Lockett will all end up at Texas. And maybe they do. Texas does have the built-in advantage that two of those guys are from the state of Texas. But I think there's an opportunity for Brian Hartline heading into this weekend to say, Jamie French and Khalil Lockett are going to Texas, and you know it, and I know it. So if that's the case, it maybe you have a little bit more clarity when it comes to recruiting DeCorian Moore this weekend, and it ups the ante a little bit for Ohio State. So I actually like the fact that there are these crystal balls and stuff happening for Ohio State, for Ohio State's purpose right now when it comes to Texas and Jamie French, because whether or not kids will admit it, they hate the crystal balls, but they also pay close attention, and they know why these things are getting put in. And it was Steve Wiltfong and Chad Simmons, highly respected people, who on Tuesday put in the crystal ball for French to Texas. And that means that they were told pretty specifically, like, Texas is the likely outcome there, which is what it is. I mean, there's a reason Ohio State hates silent commitments. Okay. Like, Jamie French was definitely telling people all the right things at Ohio State in the last couple months. And so whatever's changed has changed, and that's fine. Brian Hartline and Ohio State are not in a position where they are going to chase a wide receiver that is a very, very good wide receiver, but he is a notch or two below DeCorian Moore on the list of like, where does this guy project? DeCorian Moore is and I'm going to say this, but I don't mean exactly what but in this class, like, he's the Jeremiah Smith of this class. So if you have to walk away from Jamie French, and because he wants a Lamborghini or whatever, like, then so be it. I think Ohio State, knowing that they have visitors like Vernell Brown, like McCutcheon, like Phillip Bell coming, Talon Taylor coming, Quincy Porter coming, they can be selective at wide receiver, and they are not going to. And this is the same for any position, and I'm going to say it, and they are not going to overspend on anyone, like, period. And I know that pisses people off. I know that makes people feel like, oh, well, they're not competing. I think that's hard to say with a straight face, because we know they are. But spending and overspending on high school athletes is a really risky thing to do. And unless it's a player like DeCorian Moore, who is clearly separated from the rest of that pack, I think that it's the right decision. And I know that you don't, but I think it is.
Yeah, I mean, I don't necessarily disagree with it, but we've spent so much time saying, like, Ohio State's NIL is in a much better place, and this and that, which I totally think it is. But if
it's in a better place because they're being smarter than other schools.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's probably fair to say. But if you've got Oregon and Texas out there willing to up the ante to whatever amount we're hypothetically talking about here, and Ohio State's NIL is in such a better spot, I don't know. I wish there was more they could do, but I understand money isn't. You don't have an infinite amount of money. You've got a lot of good receivers on the roster. You just signed the best receiver, like, in the history of the world, basically. Yeah, exactly. So I can see what you're saying. But bottom line, if they can finish the class with, I mean, DeCorian Moore, that'd be awesome. Although I know you've been more worried about Oregon than Texas. If they can get him and then get Vernell Brown and get one of these other guys, Quincy Porter or somebody like that. And I did watch some more Desi Jones highlights, and he's definitely growing on me. But
yeah, he's a baller. He's good. Yeah, he is really good.
He is a good player. He does not have the 5 stars next to his name like a lot of these guys we've seen, but he is a good player. But yeah, get those 3 to 4 guys, and I'm perfectly content. And I imagine Brian Hartline would be too.
Yeah, and I don't mean to have this come across like I'm disparaging Jamie French in any way. He is. I watched Jamie French. I wrote about him 2.5 years ago, and I saw him when he was a freshman. And I said, "This kid's going to be the real deal." Like, you could tell, he is a really, really good player. I've seen DeCorian Moore in person. I've seen Jamie French in person. Seen them both in camp settings. I've seen them both I've seen DeCorian Moore playing in the state championship game against Evan Sanchez in North Shore High School. DeCorian Moore is different. Like, he is different. And if Jamie French is playing a game, and this is where I want to be careful, because I wrote this on the message board at rivals.com on Tuesday. If you're in a situation here where you are playing the game, or in you in your heart are like, hey, I know I want to go to Ohio State, but I'm going to try to raise my value or do this. Like, that stuff is fine and good. And I know people are suggesting that you do it. And there's people who say, oh, this is your one opportunity. Go out and get everything you can. Ohio State does not have to play the game with you. So if that's where things are, I would recommend that there be a recalibration. And if it's really a situation where, people have said, hey, if Ohio State doesn't want to play the game with me, then they're not who I want to rock with anyway, so I'm moving on. Like, if that's the case, that's cool. But Jamie French is a really good player. He's had a good relationship with Brian Hartline for a long time. I'm sure that they have much deeper conversations than I'm privy to. And I think it'll be very interesting to see if he decides to get to Columbus over these next 3-4 weeks, as opposed to putting off the official visit until the summer or until the season. Because as I said last week, I don't know that spot that he would want to have at Ohio State will be there if he waits that long. So that's that.
Yeah.
That's it. That's the way it works. Defense. Now, we already talked about TJ Alford and Deshaun Stewart. There's only 2 other defensive players visiting this weekend. And in my opinion, Riley Pettijohn and Justin Hill are 2 of the biggest players left on the board for the defense in the class of 2025. Again, it is a class that already has 9 commitments on defense. So they're probably, they need 7 or 8 more probably. But McKinney, Texas linebacker Riley Pettijohn, and Winton Woods out of Cincinnati, defensive end, edge, linebacker, whatever he wants to be, Justin Hill, are, I think, 2 of the most important. And I think it is absolutely brilliant that Ohio State has these 2 on campus the same weekend as TJ Alford, because if you look at that group from just an athletic profile, like, Ohio State has had nothing like these 3 dudes on the roster at the same time, really until this year, where you have Sonny Styles and CJ Hicks and Arvell Race. You have not had this level of hyper athlete that they're starting to develop right now. And I think it's going to be exciting for all those guys to get together. In speaking to a couple people around the program over the last few weeks, and there's been a ton of buzz about Texas and Riley Pettijohn. But the people that I talk to at Ohio State don't necessarily buy it. Like, I mean, they know Texas is a real threat, but I think that they actually believe that they may have the inside track there. I don't know that I believe that. Maybe it's just optimism from their part, but I think Ohio State is much more a real threat for Riley Pettijohn than people want to give them any real credibility or credence to. You don't believe that, though?
No, I mean, that's great to hear. You're the first person I've heard say that, really. But I was going to say, when I look at those 2 names, the big picture thoughts from me are, I see one total long shot and one kid that is a must get, whose recruitment is now far more of a battle than I ever expected it to be, especially when we thought maybe Alabama was going to be a thorn in Ohio State's side. Then Nick Saban left. And then I just thought, well, he's going to come to Ohio State. Now I've seen people suggest that Ohio State is running 3rd behind Alabama and Oregon. I have no idea if there's any truth to that, but I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. We've talked a lot about Justin Hill. I talked about him on the Tuesday morning episode of the Podcast Daily with Bill and Austin briefly. Like, and I'll reiterate it here, or say it again. I think if you take away like positional importance, so Tavian St. Clair is a quarterback, Carter Lowe's an offensive tackle, like those positions are at a premium. And because Justin Hill is not a true like defensive end, he's more of a hybrid combination type player. I think maybe his value gets mitigated a little bit. I think he's the best player in the Midwest. I am absolutely enamored with Justin Hill as a football player. And I think that the idea of him going to Oregon or Alabama is something that simply cannot happen for Ohio State. So I don't know that I believe that the Buckeyes are third. I don't know that Justin really has a true sense of where his order is. I think, and I've thought for a while, Justin wants to go to Ohio State, I believe. And I could be wrong. I mean, I'm not in his head. I'm not a 17-year-old kid. He really loves Alabama. He likes Tuscaloosa a lot as a town. He's a big fan of Dan Lanning and what Oregon, their program and where things are going. I think he wants to go to Ohio State, and I think he was desperately pleading for Ohio State to show him a plan of how they would use him on the football field in their defense heading into his official visit. The fact that James Laurinaitis, Jim Knowles, Tim Walton, and Larry Johnson all went and saw him a week ago was a game changer. It was the first time Larry Johnson's been involved in his recruitment at all. And there is still a real mystique around Larry Johnson as a defensive line coach and his pass rush, platitudes and the way that he's made himself into the most valued defensive line coach in college football, maybe history. And that visit was impactful. And I do think that if Ohio State was trailing, I think that it has leveled the playing field again as you head into these visits. You've got Ohio State this weekend. You've got Oregon on June 21st. Alabama and USC are in the middle of those. I think like you wish Ohio State would get the final visit, but since there is a commitment date scheduled for July 3rd, it's not a situation where he's going to go out and visit somewhere and then immediately make an announcement. I don't know that the timing or the rotation of the visits matters quite as much, because either way, he's going to get home on June 23rd and spend 10 days percolating on things and trying to figure out like exactly what he wants. But I really like that Ohio State had that opportunity a week ago, and I think it will elevate them heading into this process. And I'm not going to sit here and say he's going to Ohio State. I still think he will end up picking Ohio State. And I know that the Oregon folks are very confident, but they're always very confident, and they should be. They spend a lot of money.
We've talked in the past about certain Ohio State coaches mishandling or even botching recruitments, like Tony Alford and Jordan Marshall. And that was a matter of not offering soon enough. But I guess my question here is, we are heading into June, and Ohio State is seemingly having to send like 12 coaches to this kid's house to give him a plan of how he's going to be used. Not his house,
to his school.
Or sorry, to his school. My bad. My apologies, NCAA. But they have to do this to level the playing field for a kid from the state of Ohio who might be the best defensive player in the Midwest. Like, I don't know. Something about that just seems like I'm not saying they mishandled it, but it's just weird that we're in this spot for a kid that's this good, that grew up rooting for Ohio State.
I think it speaks more to the evolution of what Justin wants to play in college as it is to how Ohio State, like Tim Walton and James Laurinaitis and Jim Knowles and Ryan Day have been all over Justin Hill for a year and a half. Like it's a recent development, and where he's starting to think like, I could be a real problem as an edge rusher and being a defensive end. And so now the conversation is, how do we teach you how to be a pass rusher? Because that was not something he was even envisioning himself doing 6 months ago. So I think what's interesting is like Oregon, I've read, and maybe it was you who sent it to me, like they're recruiting him as an inside linebacker who, like, I don't know how that fits him and his style of play at all. So, I mean, recruiting is sales, and we know that, and people will tell you, these kids pretty much anything they want to hear. But it's weird to me that Oregon is being viewed as more of a schematic fit if they are recruiting him as an inside linebacker, because that's definitely not a position he's ever played. And I don't know that he fits in that role at all. I think he is a perfect edge rusher / off ball linebacker. he wants to see Ohio State use the jack, but Ohio State, obviously, we've talked about that over and over, hasn't really used it. They're recruiting him for that position. But in the meantime, until they can put that on film and show him it, they need to have him working with both Larry Johnson and James Laurinaitis and figuring out like, hey, how can I be the best version of myself? And Larry Johnson made a big impact. I don't think that's Ohio State dropping the ball. And again, I know I get accused of scarlet colored glasses or whatever. It's just the evolution of how Justin sees himself. And so now you have to figure out how do you respond to that. Larry Johnson was not going to even be visiting him at his high school until Ohio State saw that Freddie Roach, the Alabama defensive line coach, was visiting him. And then it was like, okay, if Alabama's sending a defensive line coach, it's probably worth having that conversation because Alabama had their defensive coordinator, their linebackers coach, and their defensive line coach. And so then it was like, well, maybe we need to adjust here because, that visit from Ohio State was actually supposed to happen a week earlier than it did. But because Larry Johnson was in Alabama recruiting Malik Autry and Zion Grady, he couldn't get up to make the visit that day, so they had to reschedule it. So they're doing everything they can, and it's there are just some instances, I think, Andrew, like, and no one's gonna want to hear it, but there's sometimes like you can't win every fight, like you just can't. I think that they will and can win this fight, but if they don't, it's easy to see why Justin Hill would pick another school because Ohio State is not playing the type of defense that he thinks that he's fit for.
Right. Though it will not be easy to see why he picks another school if he's going to be used as an inside linebacker, because that makes zero sense.
That is confusing. Right. Yeah. That does not make any sense. That's the end of the official visitor preview. We're going to jump into the 4-minute offense right now. Okay, we're back. What's on your mind? We've already talked ad nauseum about Jamie French. I don't know if there's anything else we can really.
I will stick kind of to that same area though, wide receiver wise. Somebody on the board posted a question about IMG Academy wide receiver Donovan. What is it? Olugbodi. I'm not sure how to pronounce the last name, so I apologize. But I believe one of the 24/7 guys, maybe Tom Loy, suggested that Ohio State could be surging in that recruitment. We've talked about, 6 to 10 receivers regularly, and he really hasn't been one of them. I know he's from Chicago originally before he moved down to Bradenton. I think there's a friendship with Carnell Tate or some kind of connection there. Maybe it's just the Chicago connection. But is that, in your estimation, a name even worth talking about now? He came out like a week ago and mentioned like 6 schools: Washington, Missouri, Florida, and Ohio State was not one of them. But then he said also kind of on the outside is still Ohio State and Alabama as just kind of fringe schools. So what are your thoughts on that?
That sounds like a kid who really wants to be recruited by Ohio State and Alabama.
Yeah.
And is narrowing his focus while keeping his dreams big. That's what I think. Obviously, when you're talking Carnell Tate from Chicago, that would make sense. IMG also makes sense. Big athlete. He's not a name I've really heard mentioned by Ohio State. 6'1", 200, another guy that's in that same mold as Halen Taylor, Phillip Bell, Dalen McCutcheon. Like, there's a lot of those dudes that are all in the same situation. I don't know if Olugbodi, however it's pronounced, is camping with Ohio State this summer, but I would imagine he would need to. Maybe he'll come up and surprise some people, but that's not a name I've heard really at all. I mean, we've talked at length about the ones that we've been really serious about, which is, of course, Desi Jones, who committed, DeCorian Moore, Jamie French, Vernell Brown, Quincy Porter, Taylon Taylor, Phillip Bell, Dalen McCutcheon. That's the group that I would imagine you'll see the 4 guys come from.
Got it. That makes sense to me. We talked earlier about some of those reports about schools being 5th on somebody's list a week ago, and then suddenly today they're up to 1st or 2nd. And that kind of goes along with Dorian Brew. I know over the last few weeks, there have been reports about Ohio State being closer to 4th or 5th on his list. And then today, one of the On 3 guys, it might've been Steve Wiltfong, somebody reputable, posted that right now it's now seeming like USC and Ohio State are kind of battling for that top spot there. I feel like if I'm an Ohio State fan, which I in fact am, that would make me feel better than thinking that Ohio State was trailing Texas and LSU right now. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, if that should make you feel better. I think that either way, there's a lot of conversation that still has to happen with Dorian Brew about exactly where he wants to play, what he wants to do. I'm interested to see when he gets to Columbus this year, this June, how long he's in town. If it's just come in for the official visit and leave, if he's going to be spending time with his mother down in the Dayton area and getting back up for more than just the official visit. I think that whatever caused the holdup or the slowdown in a decision from Dorian back in January when he was 100% going to pick Ohio State at that time, I don't want to say that it's caused like a ripple in the or a rift in the relationship, but I think a ripple is a fair way to say it. Like that. Now, situations have changed a little bit. Obviously, Blake would be no longer committed to Ohio State, so you have the opportunity for a third cornerback if Dorian wants to be a corner exclusively. I feel less and less like Trey McNutt will end up at Ohio State, and so that opens the door there. If maybe you're talking about Dorian as the safety corner combo, so there's spots there. Whatever prompted him to want to pull all the way back in his recruitment in January is still going to be around and still part of this discussion. I just made my own word.
It's cool.
But LSU, obviously, that's where his father ran track. Texas is, where he lives now. I think that there's probably some clickbait stuff happening. That's all I'm saying. Like I know, like certain people in this industry, like they're not trying to be clickbaity. They're just saying the way the winds are blowing that specific day, and it comes across that way. But like it can't change that much over a 4-day stretch, But it does, seemingly a lot.
Yeah, I get it. Do you want to do one in or out before we call it a quits?
Sure.
Okay. I don't think we've done this one yet. Arguably the most important one of the entire cycle. But I had read some stuff online about, On3 has their big thing, On3 Elite Series, whatever it is going on right now.
Yeah.
And I had read that David Sanders is hanging around a lot with Ohio State commits. His mom, who we know is already close with Paris Johnson's mom, is hanging around with, maybe it was Tavian St. Clair's parents or some of those guys. But like right now, would you have David Sanders, number one tackle in the country, maybe the number one priority left in Ohio State's class? Would you have him in or out right now as we sit here heading into June?
No pressure. I think I would have him in. I really think, I was on that train before the visits began this spring, that Ohio State was much more involved in that conversation than people gave them credit for. Tennessee is still the one that spooks me the most because they are closer to home. They do a lot of aggressive stuff with NIL, the offense. They were able, like Darnell Wright was put in the NFL a couple years ago, even though they don't really play a pro style offense, they're able to put it out there that, hey, they put running backs in the NFL, they put receivers in the NFL, they put offensive linemen. Like they do a nice job with Josh Heupel's offense. Clemson this weekend is going to be swinging for the fences. That's what they do on official visits. They will put a lot of pressure to say, hey, you don't even need to make these other visits. I don't see that being the case with Sanders, like skipping out on other visits. Georgia is obviously always a concern. I know he's close with the Georgia offensive line commits from multiple visits there. But yeah, I do think that the family dynamic here is going to be very important for Ohio State, not just Monica Daniels, but yeah, the St. Clair family has been very, very involved in getting to know the Sanders clan, and it matters. I mean, you have even I saw a picture from the On3 Elite Summit or whatever, like with Devin Sanchez hanging out with Trey McNutt. Like, they're not quitting on any of these things. Like, their job, these kids know that they're there to recruit. And Tavian is not like a super aggressive in your face, come play with me type of guy. But he's a very genuine kid, and his family is very sincere, and they're trying to get to know Samantha Sanders and David Sanders Sr. in a very sincere way. And it does matter. Like, if you go back to the 2013, 2014, 2015 Ohio State recruiting classes, you remember how involved all the parents were, like the Colliers, the Elliots, like that is what built those classes. And in many ways, because social media has changed so much in the last decade, like, kids it feels weird because they should be tighter than ever because they have more ability to connect, but it's so segmented. And when you can actually have families interacting and families working together, like, I think it's really powerful. And I do think David Sanders would be in for Ohio State today, but there's a very important 4-week stretch coming up.
Yeah, that sounds about right. Now we can watch as GoBuck69 on Twitter goes and photoshops your face. Ohio State recruiting writer Jeremy Birmingham, crystal balls, RPMs, David Sanders to Ohio State, confidence level of 10 or 100 or infinity.
Yeah. I'm not putting in any RPMs or any other future casts or crystal balls or anything like that. I have long believed that the relationship with David Sanders was much better than people gave Ohio State credit for. I think that's proven to be true over the last few months, and I'm glad everyone else has caught up to that. But now is when it's crunch time. Coffee's for closers, and Justin Fry has, who I think has taken a lot of flack from people, and I've said as much before that I don't know that it's always called for, but this is a battle he has to win, and Ohio State needs to go out and do it, and it could be like the final piece of an offensive line group that I think could be really good by the time that June is over. And David Sanders was certainly the biggest one. Certainly.
Awesome.
Anything else, Andrew?
That's it for me.
Great. This has been Talking Stuff. We appreciate you taking some time on your Wednesday afternoon or evening or, Thursday morning, whenever you watch this, for watching it. It doesn't matter. We appreciate it. We like you for doing it. If you like us, please, leave a subscription, rate on podcasts, or review it and say, hey, that was cool, or give us a thumbs up, or hit the little bell so that you're notified when more stuff comes on. And either way, just tell your friends. This has been Talking Stuff. He's Andrew Ellis. I'm Jeremy Birmingham. Goodbye.